Hello, everybody. We're here, but I'm doing a little something before we fully go live.
Okay.
So,
And I'm going to be sharing the show out.
okay,
Let
great.
everybody know you're live.
Thank you.
Go. Sharing is caring.
Yes, it is. Here we go. Got the thing is done wrong here.
Okay.
I'm glad you're sharing it to Facebook. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to share it to Facebook also. I promoted it on Twitter.
Okay. You got to get you a nice sized audience.
Yeah, that works very well for exploding the audience.
Yes, they're really getting out to everybody that your show's on. It's interesting how you censor it until you promote it.
Yes.
It's like a limited audience.
Here we are.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Sorry we were doing things scenes a little bit, but this is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and my friend Dee Piers, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, is joining me tonight. Hello, Dee.
Hello.
Glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
And there's Evelina. Hello, Evelina. Great to see you here. We have a number of topics for you tonight. The first one is the second installment of uh, thinking on the possible collapse of Israel. And then the second topic is the possibility of a U.S. economic collapse, because a lot of people have been talking about that. People who specialize in international relations and who perhaps shouldn't be talking about that at all are talking about it. Uh, and then we have more on brinkmanship, because we're still very much involved in brinkmanship at the moment. Then we'll address again the possibility of an Israeli attack on Iran. And finally, we're going to talk about how to stop the genocide in Gaza. So those are our topics for tonight. We're going to start off by continuing the video that we played last time. It was a video of Neema's, and he was interviewing uh, um, Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, best known as the former aide, both while in the service and at the State Department, to Secretary of State Colin Powell, back in the early 2000s. But soon after that, he became a professor at William and Mary in Virginia, and the rest of his career was as a professor. And now he's a professor emeritus. So he's a pretty heavy guy. in many ways. I don't mean physically, I mean in his thinking. He's actually in pretty good shape for an 80-year-old, as far as anybody can see. And we're going to share the video at this point. Right. From this point at roughly 3606 in.
Case of Azerbaijan and Armenia, do you feel
I kind of couldn't believe what I learned about how broth is made commercially. Typical store-bought broth, Saudi.
that they're heading toward some sort of conflict that would remind us the conflict in Georgia, or maybe somehow connected with Ukraine? Because the way that Armenia, it's a little country, it's not that big, it's not, the population is small, and they're trying to make some sort of confusion for themselves.
Yeah, they got a problem with, Erdogan. They got a problem with Syria now. They got a problem with Iran. They got a problem with maybe even ultimately with Georgia if Georgia maintains that government that they have right now, which is very balanced. Doesn't want to be too close to NATO. Doesn't want to be too close to Russia. Wants to maintain a balance, which is smart, very, very smart. But they're caught in this mess that's associated with the new trade route, if you will. The Caspian, Baku, all of that area is very, very pregnant once again. And I use that term guardedly and carefully because that was, remember what I just read you? That's where those dudes landed, essentially. There's more natural gas and oil under the Caspian Sea, more than enough to run Central Asia for the rest of eternity. Now, that doesn't factor in climate change, but this is where the wealth is. This is where the future is. And you're in the middle of it, and you've got Iran now having proven itself as being a lot more capable than anybody else thought. You've got the empire still talking to you about how they are the most capable country. And so Armenia, Azerbaijan, those border states, if you will, have got to figure out, what do we want to do? Do we want to keep up with this internecine fighting of one another, which they love to do, or do we want to kind of check our six and check our flanks and look around and say, okay, Iran's powerful now. Iran can take care of us on its own if it wants to, take care of us in terms of military power if it wants to. Russians can certainly take care of us if they want to. The United States is miles and miles away and collapsing. It's broke. It's so broke. If you sold the United States tomorrow morning, got money for every physical asset the United States has, you wouldn't be able to pay the debt off. That's how broke we are. They need to figure out what the real power in the world is and then adjust themselves to that power. And I would recommend to them that they think really hard about the power of Russia and about the power of China, because that is what they are going to ultimately have to contend with. And forget Ankara and forget Washington.
Of course, there is no problem in paying the debt, except a political problem. There's no economic problem. Of course, the politicians can be very, very stupid and can refuse to implement the solution that will take care of the debt, or can mistakenly do something that's not needed at all with respect to the debt. And we'll be talking about that sometime later, spending a lot of time on it, okay, tonight, because not only is Larry Wilkerson talking about the problem of the debt as a serious problem coming up, but we have a video from Colonel McGregor very shortly where he goes on and on about the problem of the debt. So I wanted again tonight to take some time to address that and to show everybody why that is not a problem. But going on with this video,
you're going to be on the wrong side of the ball game. You need to think about Tehran, Beijing, and Moscow, and less so about your immediate surroundings, because your immediate surroundings will get you murdered. Whereas good relations with those three power centers will protect you. That's the equation now. That is the equation now. Quit listening to Washington, quit listening to Berlin, quit listening to Paris, quit listening to London. That's not the power. The power's the other way. Up that way. East and north. That's where the power is. And if you don't believe it, wait until Russia gets through with Ukraine and turns its eye to you.
This banana peel isn't garbage. It's a resource because I have a mill food recycler.
Then we had Donald Trump. He said that Iran has been very nasty with their words. They are still talking about enrichment after getting a beating.
You bet.
Who?
Enrichment and a bomb, probably. You know how I feel.
Yeah. Who does that? We won't allow it. The enrichment he's talking about. And we had the Iranian foreign minister responding to Donald Trump. At least as I know, the first time he's just directly Arakchi. Arakchi is talking. He's responding to Donald Trump. And that's Iran knows the extent of the damage that it caused on the United States and Israel. It doesn't matter how much you're censoring the news. And if aggression is repeated, we will not hesitate to react in a more decisive manner and in a way that will be impossible to cover up. And this is the first time I see Arakchi talking this way, Larry.
Iranian people didn't like too much the way the president and he were talking.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know how I think? I think they are playing a game back against us. I think they're playing the game. The president giving his speech, the foreign minister talking the way he did initially, pissing the Iranian people off. I think they're playing a game. I think they're dissembling to a certain extent. And the diplomatic track is just as we used it against them and then murdered their people at home in their beds, just as we did that, they're going to turn the tables on us. I think they've already made a decision. I think they're going to have a nuclear weapon. And I take Ted Postal to heart when he tells me that they can have one very, very quickly. Very, very quickly.
Yeah. Actually, I talked with Ted. He described why is that the case. And he said if they want to go after nuclear weapons, they're going to get it right away. And
they can do just like the North Koreans did. I've said this a number of times. They tested, the North Koreans tested, and we didn't even know they tested. We got signals from the seismic center in Geneva that there'd been an event, and they couldn't put their finger on what it was. Was it an earthquake? What was it? And so we said, wow. We know what happened with Kang Sak-ju and Yi Gun and Pyongyang when our assistant secretary talked with them, and they looked at him and said, we already have nuclear weapons. Jim Kelly almost fell off his chair. We already have nuclear weapons. Well, then we said, oh God, they must have tested. So then we put everything up, our sniffer aircraft and everything else. In the second test, we actually identified. The Iranians could do the same thing. They have deep underground areas where they could test too. And then, maybe they wouldn't even need to test. They would go ahead and trust their technicians and so forth. You can do a number of things with computers. They're very sophisticated. You can tell if your system's going to work more or less with computers, but you really probably should do a test if you want to be really certain that what you've got is workable. They could do it underground. We wouldn't even know it. And then they just present it to us as a fait accompli. Do you think anyone would challenge them? I doubt it very seriously. You'd have the clown in the White House, the clown in their center ring. He would make some statement about, oh, we're going to put 20 of our nuclear weapons on alert, and we're going to target them on Tehran. Blah, 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 blah. Well, go ahead, Donald. Let's see what you think once Iran has a nuclear weapon.
I think it's very interesting. It'll be very interesting to see what Donald thinks when they do have a nuclear weapon. Very interesting indeed. I agree with Larry. They're going to have a nuclear weapon very soon if they don't already have one.
Did you see the news in the on CNN? It says that the United States has used 25% of THAAD missiles during the 12 days of war between Israel and Iran.
Of THAAD?
How amazing, 25%. How can you?
Of THAAD?
Of
Theater
THAAD?
high altitude. Yeah, yeah. I don't doubt it for a heartbeat, and I don't doubt either that Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter and others are right. I haven't done the research on it that they have, but I don't doubt that they're right, that Lockheed Martin and RTX and others that do this sort of thing for our government or our industrial base, if you will, defense industrial base, they can't even come close to China or Russia. And more importantly, they can't come close to the kinds of things are being done in Ukraine right now. So, I mean, if Russia can make, say, 100,000 155 rounds every month, and we can only make 10,000, whatever the figures are. I know Scott and Doug have their fingers on it.
If you haven't exercised in years, you have to start small with my beginner-friendly Tai Chi class. 3 reasons every man.
What are we to do? We can't make them fast enough. I'm convinced that Pete Hegseth went to Trump, the Secretary of Defense went to Trump and told him, you got to stop this because you're bleeding down our assets so dramatically that if we were to go to war with China or someone else that had reasonable defense capability, we'd be in a real pickle. And that's what got Trump to stop some of the flow into Ukraine and to turn it over to the Europeans and to say things like, well, we'll give them the equipment, but the Europeans will make sure they get it, or we'll take it out of their warehouses or whatever. That's all hogwash. Europe and America together couldn't match Russia, let alone Russia and China in terms of defense industrial base. They swamp us, Nima. They absolutely swamp us. And I doubt anybody's really given a good briefing to Donald Trump. One, he won't sit down for it long enough on the defense industrial base. But whether it's THAADs or PAC-3s, Patriot missiles, or any kind of weapon system that would be critical to the United States and its ability to defend itself, let alone attack another country like China or Russia, is just inadequate. It's completely inadequate. And Nima, it would probably take, if it could be done, and I have done some study in this, and I've had students do a little work on it, it would probably take 2 to 3 years before we could even, and major decisions to divert spending to the defense industrial base and not to contractors like Lockheed and RTX as the way we're doing it now. I'm talking about really build up a shipbuilding base, a submarine building base, an airplane building base, all the kinds of things we did, say, in 38, 39, 40, and 41 to become the arsenal for democracy, which is really the way we won World War II. It wasn't on the battlefield. We won World War II by supplying the Soviets, the Free French, the British. We supplied everybody amongst the United Nations, the Allies.
Of course, Larry is completely right about that. We forget, those of us born after 1950, let's say, maybe I should say after 1960 or 1970, don't really have any memory of that. They read about it in books. Okay, but we have quit the mobilization of our industrial base in order to create a defense. And our defense is now very much second rate compared to the Russians and the Chinese. Uh, if we don't want to do anything about it, which we don't want to appear to do, then what we have to do is to stop trying to pretend that we're the hegemon of the world. We have to bring the troops home. We have to bring the forces home. And we have to stop trying to project a power that we don't really have and look to defending our nation here. Our foreign policy needs completely an overhaul. As far as going the other way, to rearm completely and to create a defense base of the kind that Larry is talking about, that kind of thing would never be the equal of what China can do anyway, because they're so much larger, and their industrial base, if they choose to make it so, will always be much more powerful than ours, because they have more than 4 times the population. That's just a fact of life, folks.
That's the way we did it. We couldn't do that today, Nima. We couldn't, because we're broken. We're broken in terms of that kind of industrial base. So in order to build it back up again, it would be, we double our debt. We're going to be at $50 trillion.
No, we don't have to double our debt. We have perhaps to double our deficit spending, but we don't have to double the debt. That's what Larry doesn't understand.
In another 8 years, it's about 39 trillion right now.
No, it's about 37 trillion, 37.5 trillion maybe.
Would be almost, I would say, incapable of doing that today. That's how badly off we are in terms of that sort of defense industrial base.
Incapable because we don't have the motivation. In the end, that may be a good thing, but the fact of the matter is we don't have the motivation to change our society to get it on a war footing anymore. In World War II, we viewed what we were facing as an existential threat. So we had actually the motivation to do it. But right now, Russia and China do not present an existential threat to the United States. Iran doesn't present an existential threat to the United States, because they're not interested in being an existential threat to the United States.
Looked at it hard when Powell became chairman and I was a special assistant in 1989. 91, 92, we looked at the defense industrial base as well as the forces we were cutting.
Powell became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1989.
By 25%. And we saw the mismatch. If we went ahead into the future and went down to the number of contractors we knew we'd go down to, suffered the monopolistic tendencies that would breed, and suffered the economic competition that would eliminate a lot else. And we said, whoa, give it 20 years, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to be in serious trouble. Well, we're in serious trouble. We're in serious trouble.
He's absolutely right about that.
This tote is capable of feeding you breakfast, lunch, dinner, and yes, even snacks for 4.
Larry, we've learned here is from media. We've learned that Iran is somehow beefing up its air defense system because they believe that finally Israel wants to attack them. Here is what we've learned. He says that Iran has actually they have the S-400 air defense system. They have somehow they were testing this air defense system S-400, the Russian one, in Isfahan, near Isfahan. You know that the Iranian nuclear facility in Isfahan, I believe they're talking about that region. And do you, when it comes to the attack on Iran, and with what we've learned, and we don't know the reality, the naked reality of what's going on, what has happened during the war, 12 days of war, with the case of how the process of deciding how the United States, Donald Trump has decided to interfere. We can speculate on that, and the extent of damages that have been done to Israel. Do you feel that would be a viable choice for Israel to go again and fight Iran?
Only if we were there maximally. And go back to what I was just talking about and apply it to this scenario. And even if we were to come in whole hog, the major thing we would come in with, if we weren't absolutely insane, is aircraft, because we do have a lot of aircraft, just as Israel has a lot of aircraft. And it comes from local areas. It comes from Al Udeid, King Khalid, and other places in Saudi Arabia. And it would come from aircraft carriers, but there's a big question mark, because the only way you get air power from aircraft carriers on a sustained basis is to have a minimum of 3 carriers. People asked Powell why he took 5 carriers to the Gulf in the first Iraq war, and he said very cavalierly but smartly, he said, because it didn't have 6. He would have liked to have had 6. If you have 3 carriers, you can generate 24-hour operations. That is if you don't lose one. Well, let's throw a wrinkle in there. The first thing that's going to happen is if we really confront Iran with a 3-carrier battle group in terms of air power, they're going to sink 1 or 2 of those carriers, because their hypervelocity missiles are going to get through the screen that the carriers carry with them with their escort.
The hypersonic missiles are not only very, very fast, but what we learned from the recent exchange between the Israelis, and the Iranians, is that they're also very, very accurate. And that's really important when you're talking about, sinking an aircraft carrier. They have the precision to sink the aircraft carrier, and they have the speed to defeat all the defensive measures the aircraft carrier task force has going for them.
Ports, submarines, and other things, and they're going to sink the carriers. Then Donald Trump's got a new decision to make. You got 10,000 Americans dead or in the water.
Yeah, 5,000 for each of the carriers.
You got a real decision to make there. This isn't the Red Sea. This isn't Al-Ansar, the Houthis. This isn't a localized small battle from which you can retreat before you take too many losses. You've just lost 10,000 Americans. So there are so many variables in this kind of conflict. But the essence of your question is, yes, we could come in with aircraft alone, both carrier-based and land-based. I suspect we do mostly land-based for the reasons I just articulated. And we could keep that going for quite a while. But bombs, Nima, do not win wars. Bombs do not win wars. The Iranians would get madder and madder and madder, ride all that out, and then retaliate. Israel's gone. Gone. Poof.
I don't even think it's as simple as that. With the S-400 systems in there, in a serious way, in other words, operating in a system, multiple S-400 installations, it would be different, than last time. Quite a few of those planes would be lost. I don't know how long we could carry on the bombings. They're envisioning here. when a lot of those planes will be getting knocked out of the sky. We also have to consider the Iranians have just received 40 of the Chinese J-10Cs, which can operate in a coordinated system and were just very successful in the India-Pakistan war. Okay, and knocking the Rafale jets from France out of the sky. So not only would we have the air defense systems, but we would now have the modern jets and their system of defense, okay, to contend with. I think even if we went in whole hog with all of the aircraft resources we have in the area of the Middle East, let's assume, along with Larry, that we keep the carriers out of it, out of fear of losing the 10,000 sailors. Then we still have a situation where the Iranians would do more than simply ride it out. They would use their air defenses and their new planes to attack. And the Israelis and the Americans would suffer serious losses in the air. And in between, even with continuous air attacks, that doesn't necessarily force the Iranians to totally ride it out. They could fire a lot of their missiles at our air bases, okay, in the Middle East, and create a great problem for maintaining a continuous air campaign.
In a puff of smoke, Israel's gone. Do we want that to happen? Does Donald Trump understand this? If Donald
Okay, a puff of smoke, if the Iranians were to use a nuclear weapon, if they developed, as we're told they can, 6 or 7 from the 408 grams of enriched supply they have now, if they developed 6 or 7 such weapons, then Israel would be gone. But even if they were not to develop 6 or 7 of those weapons, even if they didn't use those weapons, but held them in reserve to retaliate, an Israeli nuclear attack against them with conventional warheads on their missiles, on the hypersonic missiles, they can pretty much destroy Israeli society and economy next time around. They came close to doing it in a 12-day war. They'll be better next time.
Trump were even presented it, could he absorb it? Because he is not the kind of person who impresses me with his intellect. So, and this is some fairly sophisticated military.
That was an understatement.
Reasoning. You are going to lose if you join Bibi. But Bibi is going to be insistent, if he starts this again, that the United States join, because that's the only possibility he has of staying in power and the only possibility he has of saving his state other than going to nuclear weapons. And if he does that, all bets are off, because then he will be destroyed.
Yeah.
This is not an easy situation. I've war gamed it. I've been with people who've war gamed it in far more sophisticated ways than I, like General Van Riker. I've talked with them. I know what it's like for the United States if we decide to mount the state of Iran with forces, or even if we try to do it with air power alone, both sea-based and land-based. We're dead at the end of it. And Israel has disappeared. And guess what the Arab countries, once they saw Israel going down, would do? Guess what that chicken shit guy in Amman would do? He would even mount his tanks. Sisi would mount his tanks. Lebanon would at least rise up.
When he referred to Sisi, he was talking about the general who runs Egypt.
With the remnants of Hezbollah. And probably Syria would join in. And maybe even that stupid coward in Ankara, who is, kowtowing still to the United States, but makes comments otherwise. Maybe he might join in because he would see that that was the winning side. So we're talking about a true mess for the empire, and a mess that, once again,
An important day is coming for every American with money in the markets, and it'll be here sooner than you think.
Bibi Netanyahu is created for us.
Thank you so much, Larry. Great pleasure, as
It's all
always.
dismal, isn't it? It's just dismal. It's so dismal. I get up.
People have characterized Nima as so
in the morning and have a cup of green
He's
tea.
not-
as so zen in his approach to this stuff. And you saw it there, when he was giving his thanks to Larry. It was, it's kind of something to vibe with.
About us, about the reality out there.
And this situation in Gaza is just horrible. It's absolutely horrible. When I think of my country being associated with that and not doing anything about it, I'm revolted.
It's difficult. I don't know how can we talk about God.
Brings you to tears, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And you watch what that young gentleman, that former Green Beret, was saying. He was in tears, and I don't blame him for being in tears. That humans could do this to other humans is unconscionable.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl.
Surely.
Great pleasure as always.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Tell Lula I said hello.
Yeah.
He doesn't remember this, but he sent his foreign policy advisor to help us when we were in where were we at that time? I think we were in Havana that time. We were later in Sao Paulo, but he sent and the first thing he said to me was, "I'm a Marxist. Can you deal with me?" I said, "Of course." All my Cuban colleagues are Marxists. Anyway, tell him I said hello if you see him.
Yeah.
Take care.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so Nima is a professor at a school, he's not in Rio. He's in another part, a more rural part. So I think the chances of his seeing Lula will be small. So I think Larry was joking with him about that. Okay, Dee, any comments on that? Hello, Dee.
Hello?
Have you any comments on that video?
Not right now.
Okay, I thought it was really, I thought Larry Wilkerson was terrific.
He was terrific, and even when he made that comment where Trump was concerned, it was funny.
Very funny, very funny. But he's so human in his approach
Yes.
to things. I think that's what's so impressive. Steve Wolfbrand is here, and he says, "A trillion here, a trillion there. What does it matter?" From one point of view, that is true. What does it matter? Steve Wolfbrand says, "I think carriers are sitting ducks nowadays. I entirely agree. They're sitting ducks for the hypersonic missiles. Evelina says, "Hi, Dee. Glad you're back."
Oh, thank you.
I'm glad Dee's back too.
Thank you.
Well, at this point, we've got just about 5,600 folks
Oh, good.
who are viewing this, and we're just getting started. So we should have a lot more pretty soon. So let us go to our next video. This is one from Colonel Danny Davis, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis, and retired Colonel Douglas McGregor. Not going to be a long video this time. I wanted to pick it up quite late, actually, okay, in the video, where Doug holds forth on the economic problems of the United States. So here we go for that. But let me share it before I forget to share it. There it is. You should be seeing it now, though I haven't started it yet. I'll go full screen first and then start it up.
So let me ask you this in the last bit of time we have here. Let me give you a scenario, which I don't think at all is, outlandish or improbable. One is that eventually you're going to have the Ukraine army just collapse. Yeah, at some point it nearly has to, just by math. And separately, that the either the Western or American economies, specifically, have a severe recession. And there's lots of warning signs on our economy right now, despite President Trump firing the person who gave the bad news the other day. I don't think that's going to change the actual reality on the ground, which is not trending in a good direction. And all these tariffs he's talking about putting on possibly on Friday could accelerate that demise. What happens to those two issues you mentioned there, support for NATO and support for Ukraine, if the Ukraine army collapses or if our economy collapses, and God help us if both of those things happen?
Well, I think many people like Jeffrey Gundlach and certainly Peter Schiff. I think also James.
Yeah, Peter Schiff is the Goldie. He's a gold bug. He's been investing in gold for years and years and years, and I think he wants to profit off the collapse because he's holding a lot of gold. Anyway, I don't think much of Peter Schiff as an economist.
For cards, a number of people out there have all said, look, when this financial crisis strikes, and in fact, Warren Buffett made this point, there will be no TARP. In other words, there's not going to be a rescue package that comes out of the government. Those days are over. Private equity is in a lot of trouble.
Why won't there be a rescue package coming out of the government? Yes, before we didn't have 37 trillion in debt, but we were at something, then we're at something like 15 trillion in debt. That didn't stop the Federal Reserve from putting together a rescue package that helped the banks. Congress putting together a rescue package. Why wouldn't it be possible to put together a rescue package? I think the problem is not that we can't put together a rescue package, but the one they put together would only further concentrate our wealth. If things collapse, we need a rescue package. That's going to start from the bottom up. That's the problem, not that there won't be a rescue package.
You've got people like Larry Fink and David Rubenstein that are staring at the abyss. They could lose trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars.
Okay, those, of course, are hedge funders and the heads of very major corporate speculative firms.
We have $3 trillion dollars worth of commercial real estate investment in our banking system. And the real estate market, both residential and commercial, is poised to plummet.
He's right about that. It is poised, okay, to plummet. But we had a plummet in 2007, 2008 also. In fact, it was the plummet that was the first thing to go in the recession of 2008. It was the initial trigger for the recession of 2008, occurred in 2007.
So no one can predict with accuracy when this happens. Nassim Taleb has talked about this. He's much more competent to discuss it than I am. He's the one that pointed out there is no reserve currency except gold. And I think he's right. So if you take all of those things together, you know this is coming, Dan.
Right now, gold is not a currency. It simply is not. In the United States, you cannot pay your taxes in gold. In Canada, you cannot pay your taxes in gold. In the UK, you cannot pay your taxes in gold. In France, you cannot pay your taxes in gold. In Russia, you cannot pay your taxes in gold. In China, you cannot pay your taxes in gold. Gold is not a currency anymore, Douglas.
You're right. When that comes, and I don't know exactly when, but I think sooner rather than later. A lot of people say, oh, no, we can go on like this for years. No, I don't think so. When that happens, people are going to say, Ukraine? What's that? The Middle East? No, that's not important.
Doug is right about that. If and when the economy crashes, people aren't going to have an attention span for what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in Iran, what's going on in Gaza. They're just going to be worried about their own selves, and they're going to be worried about the government responding to save them and save their housing and just, save their economic life. And he's right about that.
In other words, everything beyond the borders of the United States will shrink to insignificance to what's happening here at home, because we'll be dealing with supply chain problems, the distribution of food, products that are vital to everyday life. The one area where we may not have serious problems, at least initially, fortunately, is fuel. But that could change. And prices, we've artificially suppressed interest rates. And despite that, if you look at the bond market, we're trying to hold down interest rates. And what happens in the bond market? The yields keep rising, and then they'll fall back a little bit, and then they rise and rise. They fall back a little bit, and they rise and rise.
The bond market can easily be fixed. But the government has the power to control the bond market. How, for example, could the government control the bond market? The Treasury could quit selling debt instruments and use another basis for financing federal deficit spending. If that happened for 2 or 3 months, the bond market would be hungry for treasuries. They'd be screaming to buy those treasuries.
At some point, you're going to hit 5% on the 10-year bonds, and most people regard that as the bellwether of disaster.
We had interest rates of 5%, certainly during the 1980s. We had interest rates that were as high as 5% or 5.5% or 6%. It was normal back then to have those kinds of interest rates. They were considered fairly low. Then the Federal Reserve collaborated with the Treasury, and they got interest rates down to near zero. And they were that way for a long time. But considering the history of this, to say that when we get up to 5%, we're somehow dead, we easily handled 5% before, and we can do it again. I mean, where does Doug get off thinking this is a problem?
And we can't pay the debt, what we owe, the interest on our national sovereign debt, which is now over 37 trillion.
Nah, what do you mean we can't pay it? What Doug is thinking probably is that we can't pay it because the Trump administration is never going to raise taxes. And right now, it looks like there's a little problem selling our debt instruments on international markets. So he's saying we won't be able to pay the debt as it falls due. But he doesn't know that there are other ways of paying the debt other than taxing and selling bonds. He also doesn't know that taxes and bond revenue, tax revenue and bond revenue, do not fund government spending. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes.
And rapidly expanding. So I think your point is valid. It's almost as though we're living in a house and we've got a fire in the kitchen. And everyone is saying, well, that's in the kitchen. We're here in the living room. Those in the dining room are fine. The fire's not going to spread. They've got it under control. Well, good luck with that, because I don't think so. And eventually it'll burn the house down. That's what people have been predicting. I think they're right. And then who cares what happens down the road in the next town over? You're worried about your own home. And I think that's what will happen in the United States.
I think that probably will. And unfortunately, I think it's going to require that, because I think too many people are just like, I'm not worried about that. And it's the collapse. And people have been warning about the looming economic downturn. It hasn't happened. Like, even though 2008 happened, it's like, well, that was an anomaly, but it hadn't happened now. So it's never going to. So we don't have to make any changes. That's why I think it's going to require that before we finally wake up. And well, that's going to have a lot of consequences, but well, I guess we'll have to visit those when we get there. But in any case, boy, really appreciate this great deal of clarity that you had with us today, because this really does point out just what's at stake here and what's not important to the United States, and what we should do to reevaluate or reestablish our priorities. And I really appreciate that.
Okay, Dan, good to see you.
And listen, also to you guys, if you have some friends who'd like to get their information.
Okay, there we go. That's the end of that particular video. We'll address the questions raised in it in just a moment. But let me go back to our commentary. Do we have any more comments? No, we don't. We do have a few more people watching. We're about 5,600 right now. Have you any more comments, Dee?
Not right now.
Okay. So let's go on to our next piece, which is a blog post that I wrote back in 2018. That is now, I believe, 7 years ago. Let me check the date on it. I think I'm sharing it now.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, it was January of 2018. So it's actually 7.5 years ago. It's called Permanent Cures for Debt Ceiling Crises. So I'm just going to read through it and do commentary on it as well. Okay, in fact, Dee, would you like to read it?
No, you can read it since you wrote the article.
Right, but I thought since I wrote the article, maybe you'd like to read it. But anyway, it's all right.
Okay.
Okay. Debt ceiling crisis politics has provided us a temporary respite by getting a continuing resolution passed that will reopen the government until the next deadline for broader agreement on February 8th. There has been no resolution of the underlying political problem, however, and so the likelihood of another government shutdown and still more damage to the economy as a further consequence at that time is substantial. Okay, by the way, they did put some band-aids on all the funding crises since 2018. I think we've had a shutdown or two since that time, though. But still, we have no resolution of the underlying political problem. So let's keep that in mind as we go through now. So now, while our attention is on the chaos and consequences of a debt ceiling crisis, it's a good time to consider how we might eliminate them entirely. Here's a rundown on the 4 most important methods one can use. Repealing the legislation on the debt limit. The first is simple. Just repeal the debt ceiling law. The reason it was passed in 1917 to grant the executive greater spending flexibility while still attempting to limit war spending is now gone. Also, the president is limited in spending to congressional appropriations and repaying the debt instrument obligations of the United States. So the only rationale for retaining it is for one political party or the other to use it as a bargaining chip to get what it wants, which is most often something that hurts a lot of Americans. How long will it take to repeal? It will probably take an afternoon. No more. Oh, sorry. Lost track of that. No more. So why don't the Republicans, who have control of both houses in the presidency, they had that, you remember, in 2018, just do it and go ahead with the things they want to do? Because both parties like, periodically, to cry poverty and to pretend that the government is running out of money. And by the way, because they cry poverty and pretend the government is running out of money, people like the 2 colonels we just saw discussing this, actually 3 colonels, Dan Davis, Doug McGregor, and Colonel Wilkerson, because the government likes to cry poverty, they believe the government. And so debt ceiling crises give the politicians an opportunity to posture about the deficit and the debt, and then pivot to austerity policies that will please their donors. Okay, so here's the first method to avoid debt ceiling crises. By the way, this is also a method to get rid of the debt. It's called high value platinum coin seigniorage. According to the U.S. Mint, this is going back to, quote, fiscal year 2016, the U.S. Mint estimated total revenues are $3,839,982,000. Total expenses are $3,595,307,000, of which $30,468,000 are for capital investments, and net results are $244,675,000 in earnings. The Mint's earnings, that $244,675,000, also known as the, quote, coin seigniorage, unquote, or simply seigniorage, quote unquote, is a net profit from coining money and selling it to banks and private individuals. The difference between the cumulative face values of the coins it ships and the expenses it incurs in producing and shipping coins to their buyers, including the operating, material, and capital expenses of the mint during 2016. Both the face values and the seigniorage accumulate to the Mint's Public Enterprise Fund, that is the PEF, account throughout the year. The Treasury can, quote unquote, sweep the PEF for the seigniorage into its own spending account at the New York Fed at will. So, that is a way for the Treasury to get the Fed to mark up Treasury's spending account with reserves. Compared to the credits to its spending account coming from other accounts holding revenue from taxing and selling bonds, the amount of coin seigniorage coming from the mint is small. But it is there, and demonstrates that there is another way the Treasury gets its spending account filled so it can spend congressional appropriations funding, its spending. Before I go on, let me point out that the credits to the spending account coming from other accounts holding revenue from taxing and selling bonds don't actually come from taxing and selling bonds, because it is an accounting fact that the issuer of reserves, or cash, issues those reserves as cash, as a liability of the issuer. So when the Federal Reserve issues reserves or cash, it is issuing a liability of the government, or liabilities of the government. Now, it is an accounting fact that when the revenue from taxing and selling bonds comes back to the federal government, then that revenue from an accounting point of view is destroyed and never gets into the Treasury spending account. It may look like it gets into the Treasury spending account because the Federal Reserve will issue an equal amount of new money corresponding to the revenue from taxing and selling bonds. And the correlation is mistaken for causation. But it's not the tax revenue and the bond revenue that the Treasury then uses to spend, I should say. It's the new reserves issued by the Federal Reserve in response to the deposit of the tax revenue and the bond revenue. That is what is spent by the Treasury. So all the money the Treasury gets from the Fed once it makes a deposit is newly issued money from the Fed. So that's important here too. Now the same thing would apply to the coin seigniorage, actually. The coin gets issued. It is held in a vault by the Fed, and the Fed issues reserves in an amount equal to the face value of the coins. And those reserves are what eventually gets into the Treasury spending account. It's not the coin that gets into the Treasury spending account. Anyway, let us go on with the article now. But it is there and demonstrates that there is another way the Treasury gets its spending account filled so it can spend congressional appropriations funding its spending. In other words, the congressional appropriations do the funding in the sense that they mandate, that spending. How the money actually gets put into the Treasury spending account is that it is always newly issued by the Fed. Going on with the article, and as it turns out, that way of Treasury filling its spending account can be used to much greater effect than in the past. By using the authority of a 1996 law to mint proof platinum coins with arbitrary face values in the trillions of dollars, Treasury, through the mint, can cause the Fed to fill the Public Enterprise Fund Account, a PEF, with enough reserves to allow it to use the resulting seigniorage to perform its already congressionally mandated spending, and even enough to pay off its existing debt. This idea, which originated with a blogger by the name of Beowulf, who was later identified as attorney Carlos Mucha, in its trillion-dollar coin TDC form, has gotten a lot of attention during the debt ceiling crisis of 2011 and 2012 to 2013. But a variation of it in its high-value platinum coin seigniorage, HVPCS form, requiring a coin with a face value of 100 trillion, for example, has received far less attention. The differences in the TDC and HVPCS variations in their political implications are great. The trillion-dollar coin, or TDC, looks like a temporary expedient to get around debt ceiling problems, whose use can be repeated when needed. But it doesn't quickly remove the political problem of, quote, the national debt, unquote, from consciousness as one of our most serious political problems. On the other hand, minting a 100T coin would change the background of politics by providing for relatively rapid payoff of the debt subject to the limit without balanced budget creating recessions or depressions. If such a coin were used, then there would be no more austerity talk and no questions about how you're going to pay for it, quote unquote, since one can always answer, once the Congress funds it, then Treasury can get reserves in its spending account from the Fed through transferring existing reserves in other accounts, including its PEF account, previously filled with HVPCS, unquote. That is, the Treasury orders the Federal Reserve to increase the balance in spending count by ordering the mint to issue platinum coins when it wants to fill it and ship the coins to the Federal Reserve for deposit. The coins then serve as a message, an order from Treasury to fill up the mint's PEF account. Once that's done, Treasury can then send an order to the Fed to debit, that is marked down, the PEF account for the value of the seigniorage and credit, mark up, the Treasury account, spending account, in that amount. That is the amount of the seigniorage. I've discussed HVPCS at length in my book, and I link to my book here. In many posts at New Economic Perspectives, and on my my current blog, which is this blog, of course, covering the subject comprehensively. So if you're interested in more detailed information on HVPCS, then these are the places to go. The book on fixing the debt that I wrote in 2013 and revised in 2014 is available from Amazon. It is a Kindle ebook. It costs $9.99, and it gives the answer to how the debt may be fixed. Explains why the debt is not a problem. So again, if you're interested in more detailed information on HVPCS, these are the places to go. So that's the first solution, high-value platinum coin seigniorage. That can be used to pay off the debt or to generate the money in the Treasury spending account to pay off the debt as it falls due. Next is overt congressional financing. The following clause is needed in every appropriations bill. Quote, upon passage of this appropriations bill, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. So, for example, I stop the quote here for a second. For example, okay, if the Congress passes a defense appropriation bill, and let's say that appropriation bill is $1 trillion or something like that, if this clause were in the bill, then the Federal Reserve would be directed to fill the Treasury spending account immediately with that $1 trillion. Okay, that's how that would work. Going on with the second sentence. In addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and debt interest as they fall due for the fiscal year, okay, of this appropriation. So, it turns out that each year, at least last I checked, and maybe more now, the necessary amount that's necessary for the Treasury to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest as they fall due for the fiscal year of the appropriation, that sum amounted to something like $78 trillion. And the reason why it did was because there's a lot of short-term debt throughout the year that's getting rolled over and rolled over, okay, and rolled over. Okay, so every time there's a rollover, okay, the federal government has to pay the short-term debt. So to account for the second sentence, the Federal Reserve would be directed to fill the Treasury spending account whenever that account was in need of reserve balances to repay all the outstanding debt instruments that appear, throughout the year. So here are the two sentences again in this graphic, so you can read them there too. Now, the first sentence ensures that in the event there's deficit spending in an appropriations bill, reserves would already exist in the Treasury spending account to allow Treasury to perform its mandated spending without further borrowing. So from the point the language is included in the legislation, further Treasury borrowing to, quote, pay for deficit spending will cease to exist. Now, that is not necessarily true, actually. I might instead have said further Treasury borrowing to, quote, pay for deficit spending will never be necessary. Now, it may not cease to exist because the Treasury may elect to issue further securities during this period of time. In other words, the Treasury is still free to issue securities. And it may choose to do so because the bond markets may demand that federal securities be issued because it's a safe place to put the money of the private sector, between investments. It's absolutely safe place to put in the money. And so corporations like to buy the debt so that they can earn some interest. And there will be such a demand. So Treasury may decide to issue some debt instruments, but probably won't issue them to the extent that they now are issuing because they won't need to. They already have the money in the account to pay everything off. Now, the second sentence ensures that reserves will already exist in the Treasury spending account to repay principal and interest on outstanding debt instruments as they fall due throughout the fiscal year of the appropriation. So from the point the language is passed, the Treasury debt will be in continuous decline until after 30 years it will be gone entirely. And the reason for that is that there are no debt instruments that are longer than 30 years old. Okay. So the oldest security will require 30 years to pay off. Now, you can pay things off before then, of course, if the Treasury decides, but that's inflationary. So the Treasury will probably elect to just pay things as they fall due. Now, since a very heavy percentage of the federal debt is short-term debt, let's say 50% or thereabouts, I may be off in that estimate, but it's a huge amount. It's a huge amount. It's in the trillions of dollars. Okay, you've often heard it said now at this point, in fact, I said it earlier in the broadcast, that we owe something like $37.5 trillion. Probably half that amount is in short-term debt that is going to fall due within the period of the fiscal year. So 18 or 19 of the $37 trillion is going to be paid off in the fiscal year. And guess what? People will then see the debt has fallen from $37.5 trillion to $19 trillion. Guess what? They're not going to worry about the debt after that. Once they see how easy it is to pay off. Now, of course, that effect will be moderated somewhat because of the demand from the private sector for debt instruments, and Treasury will begin to accommodate that demand. But still, the Treasury will be continuing to pay off short-term debt because it will always have the money, obviously. Let us call incorporation of this language in appropriations and in CR bills overt congressional financing, OCF, a fiscal policy, and associated deficit spending. And what we have now, in contrast, let us call implicit congressional financing, or ICF. OCF is better than ICF in that it is much more transparent and almost immediately will be much more popular with most people than ICF and its load of public debt instruments. Within 6 months of passage of the legislation providing for OCF, its effects will be visible enough for the public to see that, quote, the debt, unquote, is a dead political issue, killed by the legislation. And for the more reflective among them to learn the lesson that the debt was never a bona fide financial issue, but always a political one caused by the failure of people to understand the fiscal power of a monetarily sovereign government to repay its own debt instruments as they fall due. At that point, and even before that, for many people, we will see the end of austerity politics, periodic debt ceiling crises, fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises. OCF directly ends debt ceiling crises because the debt is no longer relevant, except as a constantly shrinking obligation that will be paid off as it falls due. As for fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises, their justification is primarily in the false claim that the U.S. is running out of money. Now, that was implicit in what Colonel Wilkerson was saying. It was implicit in what Colonel McGregor and Colonel Davis were saying. They were making the assumption that the U.S. is running out of money and doesn't have the capacity to pay the full load of debt the U.S. has incurred. Obviously, both of them, or all three of them, were not taking seriously the grant of power to the Congress in Article 1, Section 8, the power of Congress to coin money as it sees fit. Over the years, that has been interpreted by the courts as the power for the federal government to issue cash, as it desires, and the power of the Congress to issue reserves as the Congress desires. Of course, Congress has turned over that authority, the authority to issue cash, to the Federal Reserve, and the authority to issue reserves to the Federal Reserve, and it's delegated the power to issue coins to the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. Mint. Those are delegations by the Congress. But Congress still has that power. It didn't get rid of that power. The font of that power, the source of that power, is the Congress and its delegation to these two agencies of the government. Anyways, as for fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises, their justification is primarily in the false claim that the U.S. is running out of money. That is, it's only running out of money because we don't exercise the authority we have. But going on with the article, and must slow the growth of the national debt enough to allow the debt to GDP ratio to shrink so that we can't afford to implement the deficit spending that may be necessary to create full employment, pass a Medicare for All bill, and do other things that a majority of the population supports heavily but does not insist upon in the face of supposed budget problems. There would be no fiscal cliffs, sequesters, or budget crises without the claim that there is a government budget constraint, a GBC. Once we dispel that claim with OCF, these things will be gone with the wind. And a new set of hopefully more fruitful problems will emerge. I look forward to these new problems, the real problems posed by the need to win debates with conservatives about the likely real effects of fiscal policy for public purpose, rather than the faux problems of imaginary fiscal constraints giving rise to neoliberal austerity. They will be a great step forward for U.S. democracy. That's the second method. The third record is making the Fed an agency within the Treasury Department. When Congress created the Federal Reserve in 1913, progressives and many others believed that the Fed could be staffed by technocrats who would be unbiased and who could be trusted to perform the vital functions of the Fed in a way that was fair and even-handed. But over the years, faith in technocrats has vastly eroded, and the legitimacy of the Fed has been undermined, in part because its, quote, independence, unquote, from Wall Street interests is seen by many as a myth. The great crash of 2008 and its aftermath have heightened suspicions about who the Fed actually works for. They have strengthened the conviction that it works for Wall Street alone and never for Main Street. After all, where was the 30 trillion plus worth of credit facilities for mortgage holders on Main Street that the Fed supplied to Wall Street and the big banks to bail them out? In addition, the feeling is spreading among the American people, and since then it's spread even more among the American people, that the established institutions are corrupt and that what is lacking is much more bottom-up democracy and much less trust in these institutions and their officials to fix them. So in this, a time of coming progressive, hopefully revolution, at that time, that's what I said, because I was hopeful of that at that time. Now I'm not so hopeful. It is time to consider once again whether the U.S. needs an, quote, independent, unquote, central bank run by technocrats and accountable only to Congress, or a central bank under the president, which would be accountable to the people through the president's accountability, as well as accountable through Congress. And raising that question leads to another even older one. Did the Congress, in creating the Fed, exceed its constitutional authority? The Constitution provides for only 3 branches of government and for only one supreme executive for the American people. But there is the Fed with its Board of Governors as chairperson, clearly an executive agency of the federal government, supposedly serving the people and the public purpose, but independent of the authority of the United States. On the face of it, that arrangement is unconstitutional and should be ended through Congress reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury and nationalizing the regional Federal Reserve banks. Now, that third method is very interesting in the context of current politics that we have and the decisions by the Supreme Court, which, operating on the unitary executive theory, which I actually just was stating above, have come out with all kinds of outrageous decisions upholding, the unitary executive theory. And I think its decisions have been creating a situation of abuse of power. They're, outrageous decisions. But here's an area where the Supreme Court can use the unitary executive theory to good effect by forcing a reorganization of the federal government so that the Treasury Department, so that the Fed is under the Treasury Department, and the Treasury Department has the authority to issue reserves to the Treasury spending account, as long as that issuance, of reserves is consistent with congressional appropriations and the repayment of debt. That would be a much better situation than we have now. Okay, evaluation. Which of these permanent cures should people who are progressive push for at this juncture of history? Repealing the debt limit law seems like the easiest fix from a purely political point of view, and it would end debt ceiling crises. But it would not remove debt terrorism from the political sphere. The debt terrorists would still be using the size of the debt to oppose progressive fiscal policy, and they would probably still be successful at imposing a deficit reduction as the aim of fiscal policy. Removing the debt limit removes one rationale for government shutdowns, but there is still another available: failure of the 2 parties to agree on a budget because they both agree on deficit reduction, but not on the mix of tax cuts and spending. And worst of all, the background of rising debt will continue to fuel the austerity politics that has been most responsible for the decline of democracy in America. The second solution, using high-value platinum coin seigniorage, would remove debt ceiling crises and eventually to debt itself from the political table, freeing up available policy space for the advance of progressive fiscal policy. But there is one problem. The president has to order the Secretary of the Treasury to mint a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value high enough to provide for ending the debt. However, there is little possibility right now that Donald Trump will do that, since his party, after passing its huge tax cuts, plans to cut entitlements. In fact, it has been doing that in the one big, beautiful bill, pleading that the government can't afford them due to the size of the national debt. But of course, it can afford the huge tax cuts. The third permanent cure is OCF. It shares the advantage of ending the debt ceiling crisis and also removing the debt issue from politics. It shares that with the HVPS solution. But it too is politically infeasible because the Republican Congress will not at this juncture give up its debt ceiling weapon against programs favored by the Democrats in Congress. Lastly, there's the cure of reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury. This is the best constitutional solution to the problems of debt ceiling crisis and the existence of the debt, but it's also the one the Republican Congress is most unlikely to support. So none of the permanent cures is feasible or likely right now. I said that then. I'm not sure right now, because if Doug McGregor and Colonel Wilkerson and Colonel Davis and many others are right, and we head into a fiscal crisis right now, I do believe the president will be brought to consider the HVPS solution, because he'll be casting around for solutions. And someone will mention that he can mint a platinum coin in order to get out of all the trouble. And Donald Trump might very well do that. Of course, he might not, for the reasons I've already stated. But I think if the situation gets as desperate as the colonels are supposing it will, and as many others are supposing it will, in the coming year, let's say, or the year after that, I can well see Donald Trump getting stampeded into minting a platinum coin with a very sizable face value. I see this as much more likely than him trying to bludgeon the Congress to do the OCF route, because even though he could probably get that done with the Republican House and the Senate, he likes to do things himself. He likes to be the dictator. And the platinum coin would appear to him much more like a monarchical solution than one that actually depends on the Congress. So maybe the political situation right now is getting to the point where it is more likely that he would use HVPS, HVPCS. But going on with the article, but what happens if the Republicans lose both houses of Congress in 2018? Then, depending on how progressive the new Congress is, change may be possible. The most likely change is repealing the debt limit law, since intense public pressure might be great enough to both move the Congress and the president to at least put an end to the damaging politics of debt ceiling crisis. In this blog, I say the HVPCS, OCF, and Fed reorganization options are still unlikely, since Trump or another Republican bent on austerity for everyone but the top end of business people will still be in the presidency and will very likely retain enough support in Congress to prevent a hostile Congress from overriding a presidential veto. So any change that will remove the political problem of the national debt from politics will have to await 2027 at the earliest. Maybe I don't have to be quite as pessimistic as that, because as I said before, if there's a really serious crash coming up in 2025 or 2026, Trump might then be conceded to mint a $100 trillion platinum coin. He would like the idea of how big it is, he would like the idea of his being the first president to do that and to solve the problem of the national debt. So anyway, maybe the political situation is more likely now that HVPS could be implemented. Or if Congress does the OCF solution, maybe Trump could be brought around to support it rather than to veto it if the economic situation is bad enough. Trump did work with Congress in 2020 to pass the CARES Act, of course. That was passed by a Democratic House. And Trump did cooperate with that House. If a Democratic House in 2027, tries OCF, and if the Senate has gone also Democratic and they try OCF, if the situation is bad for business at the time, Trump would be under tremendous pressure to sign such a bill. Once that bill is signed once with the boilerplate 2 sentences, if it gets signed again 2 or 3 times going forward, it's going to be institutionalized. And even a Republican Congress won't dare to remove the 2 sentences from further funding bills. I mean, why do it? It keeps things safe. And it pays off the national debt, which will be very popular. But going on to 2029, then if a progressive president and Congress are both elected, repeal of the debt limit bill is probably a certainty. The broader question is whether such a Congress will pass one of the permanent cures or whether the president will order the HVPS solution. In my view, the president may do that if she or he understands the overriding political importance of removing the debt issue from politics for good and completely reoriented Washington away from austerity politics. But it is much more likely, I think, that a progressive Congress will end the perceived but faux debt problem by passing OCF. OCF doesn't go as far as ending the Fed, but it does end the political problems of the debt and the debt limit law by providing for gradual repayment of the debt without raising taxes in a highly visible way. So opposition to it should be the least among the 3 permanent cures to both problems, and that is why it is likely to be it's 4 permanent cures, both problems, and that is why it is likely to be the option passed by the first progressive Congress, supported by a progressive in the White House. Hopefully, we might get that in 2029 if things break in the right way. Let me go back to the kind of statements made by Colonel Wilkerson, Colonel McGregor, Colonel Davis, and many other people commenting on our international relations problems right now. The existence of these particular solutions, I think, makes it likely that even though there may be a serious political crisis that arises with respect to the debt, that somehow our politicians will find their way to one of the solutions that I outlined here. Hopefully it will be the HVPCS solution or the overt congressional financing solution. Those are the ones that I prefer, certainly. Either one will provide a permanent cure for debt ceiling crises and will also show people that there is no national debt crisis, that it can always be paid off by a monetary sovereign like the government of the United States. So, Dee, any comments on that?
It was music to my ears.
Oh, was it?
Yes, to hear rational communication concerning economics.
Rational communication about economics.
Yes.
For some reason, my count of people attending has sort of remained at 5,891.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's wrong with the promotion bit tonight. But anyway, Evelina says in 2007, 2008, Obama chose to bail out the banks, not the mortgage borrowers. Variable interest loans, the reason why new homeowners suddenly could not meet their mortgage payments. No, I don't think that was the reason. They could not meet their mortgage payments because the value of their houses fell through the ceiling. Okay, they were underwater in terms of home equity. And when many of them lost their jobs due to the recession, they could not draw on their home equity to keep on paying the mortgages because the home equity was not there because of the collapse of, the market for housing. In other words, people who got mortgages in 2005, 2006, and 2007 found the values of their home declining by 30% to 50%, and they were underwater. They had no equity. So when they ran into recession problems and lost jobs, they could not pay their mortgages, and they lost their homes in many instances. And here is Lisa Theobald, who is on vacation in Hawaii,
Wow.
giving us an aloha.
Aloha.
Hello, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
How are you? I hope you're having a wonderful time. Anyway, so here we are. And so I hope all of those attending heard the reason why we have a cure for an economic collapse. We may have a recession and we may have a depression, but we always have the capability to spend our way out of it because of the money creation power of the federal government, the reserve creation power of the federal government, the fiscal policy power of the federal government. All we need is for Congress and the president to have the will to exercise that power. That is all that we need. Okay, let us go on with the rest of the show here. Our next piece, okay, is a video from George Galloway, who is interviewing Scott Ritter.
Okay.
And this is a very, very interesting video. Let me go back to the beginning. It's an extremely interesting video.
On August 22nd, I told viewers that the road to artificial general intelligence was already bringing massive changes to society.
Sorry about that.
As our next guest, and the size of the audience watching across all.
Let's go back.
Well, frankly, there could not be a better time to have Scott Ritter as our next guest. And the size of the audience watching across all platforms right now indicates that the public agree with me. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome back to the mother of all talk shows, Scott Ritter. Scott, before we get on to what is actually happening, can you give us a word or two about what the Taiwanese were claiming an hour ago, that China was imminently about to, they say, invade I'd say, retake their own territory from the separatists who've held it since 1949. But either way you dice it, is it true? Is it accurate? Have you any intel on that?
You know, I'm not in the intelligence arena anymore, so all I get is what's available on open source information. According to multiple reports, including some out of China, there has been a military buildup in a particular geographic area opposite Taiwan that could be indicative of a preparation for military action to retake Taiwan, an invasion of Taiwan. What I don't see is the appropriate trigger for such an action. The Chinese have indicated a certain tolerance for stupidity out of both Taiwan and the United States. They've weathered trips by speakers of the House to Taiwan that appeared to give the Taiwanese government a legitimacy that
So I just wanted to say, Lisa sends us not only aloha, but North Shore Village bed to all, and North Shore vibes to all. Seems to me it's a little early for bed in Hawaii, isn't it? It's something like 4:45 in the afternoon or something like that. But anyway, I just thought people might want to hear that.
the mainland Chinese would reject. They've tolerated American weaponry flowing into Taiwan in a manner that indicates more than just self-defense, and they haven't, taken action. This would be a precipitous action, one that I don't believe China will undertake. I think that this is a lot of hype at this point in time. I think there would have to be more triggers in place, not just talk of a trade war, but a trade war that actually became heated to the point where China felt that it had broken free of the limits of the economy and become geopolitical in nature, where military force now is required to resolve certain situations.
Maybe Donald Trump can offer to mediate between them. That could be his sixth war.
That last thing Scott said sounds very threatening. I don't think the Chinese will ever get to that point. I think the United States might have recourse to military solutions, but I'm not sure the Chinese will ever think it's necessary to go to military solutions unless the United States goes to those first. So going on.
Averted in 6 months. Let's turn to the wars that are and are raging and maybe about to escalate still further. I talked in my monologue about the reports. They're not confirmed by London, but Russian reports are clear enough that 2 colonels, and you're well aware of how important a colonel is and how much more important to find 2 of them, apparently tourists, war tourists who were keen on looking at the sites of former maritime battles in the middle of a Ukrainian military base stormed by special forces of the Russian Federation and an MI6 operative as yet unnamed. The colonels are named and all their ranks and serial numbers are in the public domain. Does this have the ring of truth to it from your standpoint?
From my standpoint, the British have painted a target on every British national they send into Ukraine, regardless of their status, whether it be colonel, whether it be sergeants with the Special Air Service. We know the Special Air Service has deployed significant forces into Ukraine, or with the Special Boat Service, who are operating in the vicinity of Odessa, advising the Ukrainians on how to use a variety of weaponry. British technicians who are working with the Ukrainians on drone warfare, adapting technologies for deep strike. British intelligence specialists working in Ukraine to retrieve intelligence and package it and turn it over to the Ukrainians so that it can again be used to target the Russians. MI6 operatives who helped the Ukrainians plan a covert strike in assassinations against Russians inside Russia. All of these people operate inside Ukraine today. Their numbers are in the hundreds, and this is an act of war. And the Russians have indicated that they will treat them as combatants.
Okay, did you say something, Dee?
No.
Okay, it's very significant that Scott points out this is an act of war. It is an act of war. Okay? The British have no business being there. They are directly fighting against the Russians in alliance with the government of Ukraine. So technically speaking, the Russians have the right to retaliate against the British, to declare war on Britain, and to use the Oreshnik against them. It is only restraint that stops the Russians from doing that right now.
If and when the time comes when they fall into their hands. There's reporting that the Russians have been actively targeting SBS operatives and SAS operatives who are advising the Ukrainians. And I would imagine if the Russian special forces, special operations forces, were out there looking for Brits and suddenly these war tourists show up, that they're fair game. War tourism is just another code word for espionage, for carrying out intelligence activities. Having a pair of colonels do this, though, is where I start to where the narrative starts to lose me. People tend to forget that you don't become a colonel because you're a sprightly, young, athletic individual. You're a colonel because you've been around for a while. Your brain may work better than others because it's been stuffed with more information and you've had higher levels of command experience, but your knees don't work, your back doesn't work. The last thing a colonel wants to be doing is war tourism in an actual war. So this is where the narrative falls apart. Until I see the colonels paraded forward,
I love the kind of detail Scott provides when he's discussing these issues. Who else would talk about the knees of the colonels?
in non-AI generated imagery. I'm going to treat this story with a little bit of circumspect.
Well, probably wise. Let's turn to undeniably significant developments. Donald Trump gave Russia 50 days, then it was 12 or 10 days, and then it was a named day, August the 8th. In between times, irked by, first time in history, that anyone has deployed nuclear weapons in response to a tweet, a mean tweet by someone not even in the Russian government. He's deployed, he said, two American nuclear-armed submarines, and the 8th of August is literally round the corner. What's your take on what's going to happen next?
Well, let's take the least of my worries here is the 8th of August. The president...
We're 3 days away from the 8th of August.
In announcing the 50 days, he did that in tandem with Lindsey Graham, gleefully saying the president has, empowered our sanction plan. Lindsey Graham had been working with, I think, Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut and others to, they said they had 80 senators on board for this massive sanctions plan against Russia. 500% tariffs put not on Russia, but on those who buy Russian energy. And they're going to bankrupt those people. And Russia will have no friends when everybody will just abandon Russia because of the economic price they're going to pay.
It is not Russia who will have no friends if this is
right.
And then I guess the president got tired of being made a fool of by Russia's continued battlefield successes and diplomatic successes. And so he dropped it, as you said, to 10 to 12 days. And now we have August 8th is the day. What will happen on August 8th? I have a feeling that the president will announce sanctions. They're not going to be 500%. The number will range from 25% to 100% against nations buying oil. But already the Chinese told them to pound sand. It's hilarious to watch Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, spin it the way he does. Because the Chinese said we have our sovereignty, and he said, "Oh, well, that means that the Chinese are going to pay the 100% tariff." No, the Chinese aren't going to pay anything. The Chinese don't care. They will retaliate if necessary. The Indians just came out and said, "We'll buy oil from the Russians. We'll buy it. You can't tell us who to buy it from." So, and that was a surprise because the Indians have historically been somewhat soft when it comes to responding to pressure from the United States. But here, Indians.
The Indians are starting to feel the spirit of BRICS. They're going to be running the BRICS conference, next year. They were enthusiastic about what happened, in the Brazil conference this year. Maybe the Indians are thinking they'll be able to get along without the United States.
Sovereignty is absolute, and the Indians have said that the Brazilians have said we don't care. That's why the president declared a national emergency and targeted the Brazilians separately, and so this will have zero impact. So I think there's an additional aspect that we'll probably see on August 8th, and that is we will start to target the seized Russian assets, and I think you're going to see some creativity on how we take these assets and deploy those funds in support of Ukraine. Now, this is a major escalation because this is outright theft. Up until now, we've just been stealing the interest that's been accumulated from these. It's still theft, but I think now we're going to start targeting the principal. And this will, of course, have to get, will create the necessity of a Russian retaliation. And remember, there is hundreds of billions of dollars of Western-owned assets in Russia that won't be Western-owned assets by the time this is finished. This is going to hit.
Yeah, this is really so stupid. I mean, what's involved? $350 billion. Why doesn't Congress just pass a bill funding $350 billion for the purposes of giving that money to Ukraine? And order the Federal Reserve to place that money into the Treasury spending account so that the Treasury can spend it in this way. Why touch the Russian money, at all? It only increases tension. It only creates hostility. And according to international law, it's completely illegal. Unless we win these wars, we're going to have to pay it back to the Russians anyway. Someone's going to have to pay it back. Ukraine's going to have to pay it back. So creating the $350 billion doesn't really mean anything to us. It won't be spent here. I guess some of it will be spent here, actually, because it'll go to U.S. companies and corporations. But it probably won't be too inflationary. And if it is, we can manage the inflation. So, I mean, why create another issue with the Russians? It doesn't make any sense.
Hard. The stupidity of this move is beyond belief because it's not going to change any outcome on the battlefield. In fact, what it will do is steal Russia's resolve into understanding that there is no diplomatic off-ramp. So there's no reason to create the conditions for a diplomatic off-ramp. And now is the time to double down and just put the pedal to the metal and get this war over with, again, on a timetable acceptable to Russia, meaning they're not going to do big arrow, big casualty events, but this war of attrition will now just be ratcheted up and the meat grinder will grind up even more Ukrainian meat. So all the people that say that we're doing this to help the Ukrainians, it's an outright lie. We're just doing this to...
By the way, the latest estimate of Ukrainian fatalities from Colonel McGregor is 1.8 million Ukrainian soldiers killed. It's been accelerating over the last 3 to 5 months. Now, Trump, of course, has no idea this estimate is out there from one of his former advisors, at least an advisor in his administration to the Secretary of Defense. I think Colonel McGregor was one of his candidates for Secretary of Defense. He has no idea this estimate is out there. I don't know if it's completely correct, but I think the number is between 1.5 million and 1.8 million. I mean, it's really up high now.
Guarantee more Ukrainians are going to die. Now we come to the one that bothers me the most, because this is as dangerous as it gets, George. It on the one hand, you have to sort of chuckle. I mean, Dmitry Medvedev's mean tweet scored. I mean, if you're going to troll the internet, he just got the President of the United States to deploy strategic nuclear forces in response to a mean tweet. I mean, maybe not what he wanted to do, but I mean, come on, in terms of trolling the motherlode baby, he just did it. Now, it may cost us all our lives, not because of Medvedev, but because of Trump. Trump deployed or claims to have ordered the deployment or redeployment of 2 Ohio-class submarines, and this is a very important term that I'm about to use, closer to Russian shores. I'll tell you why this is scary and should scare the daylights out of everybody. Closer to Russian shores because of a tweet that Dmitry Medvedev put out in response to mean tweeting by Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump, which sort of hinted at not only the sanctioning of Russia, but also the possibility of a preemptive strike against Russian leadership. And so Medvedev said, look, you know.
Yes, that was a decapitation strike they were hitting at. That they basically were hinting that they were going to try to kill all of the leaders of the Russian government with a decapitation strike. Imagine that.
This crazy talk. You guys might want to watch The Walking Dead to see what America is going to look like after a nuclear strike. And remember, we have the dead hand, even though then he said, if it exists. I'm here to tell you personally, it does exist. What is the dead hand? The dead hand was a system created in the 1980s by the then Soviet Union in response to increased nuclear strike capability by the United States. One of them was Pershing II missiles that were getting ready to be deployed to West Germany. The Pershing II, if launched from West Germany, could strike Moscow with a nuclear warhead within 7 to 12 minutes of being launched. And the Russians were not happy about this because this created the potential of decapitation. But there was also the Ohio-class submarine armed with these new Trident missiles. And the Russians feared a scenario, get ready what I'm about to say, where the Ohio-class submarines would come close to Russian shores, launch their Trident missiles on a reduced trajectory where they could strike Russian missile silos, command and control, and other facilities within 20 minutes of launch. The combined capacity of the Pershing II and the Trident submarine led the Soviets to say the United States has the ability to launch a very effective preemptive strike that could take out our command and control, take out our missiles, and we're in a lot of trouble. So they came up with what they call the dead hand, the perimeter system. This is a system of sensors, radiation detection sensors, seismic sensors, communications monitoring sensors, all of which have to function flawlessly 24 hours a day. Because if, for instance, they ever lose communication with their nuclear command center and they detect at the same time seismic activity, Kamchatka's earthquake should come to mind, people. There are ways of things happening. But if that seismic activity had, for instance, been matched with radiation detection and they lose contact, what the perimeter system does is it launches missiles not armed with warheads, but with communication broadcast capability that fly over Russian territory, broadcasting the launch codes, which automatically override everything, and everything the Russians have gets launched against the United States. It's real. I know. I inspected 3 of these missiles when I was in Votkinsk as a missile inspector. It's as real as it gets, ladies and gentlemen. It's not fiction. It's not. They're real. They exist. And even though Dmitry Medvedev didn't want to officially acknowledge his existence by a former president of Russia raising it to this level, It's real. And so what you're saying is if you attack us preemptively, you're going to die automatically. And what does a
So, in this case, Scott is a first-hand witness to this dead hand capability of the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's amazing, but evidently true.
President of the United States do? Deploy 2 Ohio-class submarines using the exact same threat model that caused the Soviets to create the perimeter and the Russians to sustain the perimeter system. This is insanity. This is as dangerous as it gets because now the Russians have to take this deployment seriously. They have to act as if the United States is preparing for a preemptive nuclear strike. And remember, nothing happens in a vacuum because just prior to this stupidity in terms of the president's overreaction to a mean tweet, the president of the United States ordered B-61 12 gravity bombs, nuclear bombs, to be deployed to England for the first time. These aren't part of the NATO nuclear deterrence. This is
What a moron, right? He sends the bomb to England for the first time in years and years, and then he wants to move the nuclear submarines.
Mm.
I mean, it's happening at the same time. Okay, and the British, meanwhile, are sending these war tourists, okay, into Ukraine, okay, to provide actual physical support, to the Ukrainians. Okay, the French and Germans are considering further interventions. The world is going mad right now.
It is.
American strike package.
It is, yes. It is. Would you like to add any more to that?
It's every day is maddening. It's maddening the stuff you read.
It is maddening. It is right. It is maddening because it is so foolish. And the Russians aren't even a threat to us. They may be a threat to the hegemony of the United States in the whole world, but they're not a threat to the mainland, okay, of the United States. They're not a threat to our continuing to be a prosperous society, a modern society. We can bring our forces back home and we can live in a collaborative way, okay, with other nations, and we can become more prosperous than we are now.
True.
We don't have to be number one, okay, in the world. We can accept a multipolar world and learn to live within it rather joyfully. There's no need for this crap.
No.
This is crap. Stupid, insane crap. Scott is telling us that, and he's right.
Package now that's been deployed forward to England, where we habitually or regularly base B-52s and B-2 bombers, F-35s that can carry the B-61. The B-2 and the F-35 are designed to carry the B-61. Now you have the Russians monitoring us. You're saying, what are you doing? Getting ready for a preemptive strike against Russia? Which means now the new Russian doctrine is they're going to be increasing their alert threshold. And if they detect additional movement, the Russians may be called upon to preempt our preemption. We're at a situation now where this has stopped being funny. This is not about mean tweets and overreaction to the president being stupid and feeding every, meme generation device out there. This is about the survival of the world. And this president, he's not surrounded by advisors who are worthy of the name, because the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff should have resigned over this. You don't deploy Ohio-class submarines based upon a social media posting. The movement of Ohio-class submarines are some of the most highly classified. You remember when Hegseth and the former National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, got in trouble over a Signal chat room talking about aircraft deployments attacking the Houthi? This is non-nuclear. This is just conventional strike forces, and people went crazy. Said, you put those pilots' lives at risk. Well, Mr. President, you just put the crews of 2 Ohio-class submarines at risk by announcing their movement. Now the Russians, the Chinese, everybody who's concerned about the Ohio-class submarine are looking for them, trying to find them. And the Ohio-class submarine's been around for more than 40 years. I will tell you, I have a high degree of confidence that both the Russians and the Chinese know how to track a moving Ohio-class submarine. So
Now that is something, isn't it? They know how to track an Ohio-class submarine if it's moving. And Trump has gotten it moving. At least if we're to believe what Trump says.
That's the big if.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Now, maybe he's bluffing about the whole thing. But if he's not bluffing, he's risking the lives of the submariners. Risking their lives. And also risking a tremendous loss of deterrent capacity.
now that crew is at risk because if they preempt a supposed preemption, that means that submarine is going to be sunk, and now they're going to die. Where's the outcry? Where are people saying, my God, Mr. President, you didn't just put all of humanity at risk, but let's get down to the brass tacks. You put the lives of those men and women on those submarines at risk through your irresponsible. This is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff job. This is the Secretary of Defense. We got an ass kisser as a Secretary of Defense and an ass kisser as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I apologize for my language, but there's no other way to say it. These are sycophants. These aren't the experts. These aren't the best of the best. These are guys who were simply put in their position because they'll do anything Donald Trump asks them to do. And that's not what we want as a Secretary of Defense and a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Well, that was a mesmerizing description of the danger we are in. Could Turkey somehow, I mean, I'm presuming these submarines, one of them at least, is headed for the Black Sea. To do that, they have to pass through the Straits, and Turkey has to agree. Or would the United States not even bother to seek that agreement? Might Turkey say, this is too escalatory a move, you don't have permission to enter the Black Sea through our waters?
I don't think an Ohio-class submarine is going to the Black Sea. It'll die. There's no way an Ohio-class submarine can operate in the Black Sea and survive. They won't even operate in the Mediterranean. The Ohio-class will operate in the Atlantic and in the Pacific. What will happen here is that the standard Pacific station, which is a classified location, they'll be leaving that, heading for forward stations, which probably haven't been manned or worked since the Cold War. And, you know, so the idea is to get closer to the eastern border or come in. If you're in the Atlantic, you're probably going to move up to the North Sea and come in closer to the Arctic Sea. And so you'll be operating in these areas. But the problem is you're moving through waters that are heavily monitored. Both in terms of above sensors, but also below ground sensors. The Chinese and the Russians, just like we have put out fields of sensors that track movement. The Ohio-class submarine is a very large object that as it moves, it's displacing water. And our ability to detect motion of this event is out of this world. We now have artificial intelligence that goes in there to help read algorithms and read data. But no, to go to the Black Sea would have to surface and the Russians go, thank you very much. And then it comes out of the Black Sea and the Russians will have a submarine waiting for it right there when it comes out. And Ohio-class submarines don't travel alone. Usually there's one or two American attack submarines hovering in the vicinity as protection, providing perimeter protection for the submarine. So as you move it, it's not just one submarine moving now. You're probably moving 3 submarines, the Ohio class and then 2 Los Angeles class or Virginia class attack submarines, providing some sort of screening and protection against any potential Russian submarine hunter-killer trying to come up behind it. Again, the more submarines that are moving, the better chances of detecting it. But no, the Black Sea, no, and the same with the Mediterranean. We used to put Polaris and Poseidon class submarines there, but the Ohio class submarines, they're designed for the deep water of the Pacific and the Atlantic.
So the launch time from one of these submarines, remind us again, would be what? Did you give a figure of 20 minutes?
If you get the submarine close enough to the Russian shore, it's 20 minutes from launch to impact, because depending on the target being hit, but a lot of the Russian missile silos are, are built along. If you go and look at where the Trans-Siberian Railroad is, and you track that, and you move off of that, that's where a lot of populated areas are, and then you'll see that the missile bases are sort of plugged along that. A lot of them are in the central to eastern part of Russia. And if I get a submarine close enough, I can cycle off Trident missiles that'll hit their targets within 20 minutes.
Do you agree with the thesis I outlined in my monologue that this kind of terrifyingly dangerous escalation, especially when there is now no INF restrictions, this being the anniversary of it, that we really are on a fast road we're really on a super highway here. If conflict does break out, it will escalate at such a speed that it's quite bewildering to me how nobody except thee and me, and not many others, appear to be even aware, never mind concerned, that we've reached this point. You know, we used to have this doomsday clock. I mean, the clock is striking 12 right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I've long said, people keep saying, "Oh, the doomsday clock. We're 2 minutes to midnight. We need to pull it back." I said, we're at midnight. I mean, we're 1 millisecond away from the end of the world, because all we need is an act of stupidity, and we just got the supreme act of stupidity. The President of the United States, based upon a mean tweet, redeploying 2 Ohio-class submarines. At the same time, he's stocked England with B-61-12 gravity bombs. George, I just wrote a book called Highway to Hell, the Armageddon Chronicles. It basically tracks this very problem from 2014 until this year. The analysis that I've done over the years about, the importance of arms control, and with the deterioration of arms control, deterioration of relations, the hyping up of nuclear capabilities without any checks and balances, we're on a literal highway to hell, where one mistake, one miscalculation, one misinterpretation of data leads to the death of everybody, not one or two. We all die. If you don't believe that, I'm sorry. I can't say, aha, see, I was right, because you'll be dead. And I'll be dead. But this is as dangerous as it gets. I mean, when I wrote the book and I published it, people said, "Oh, Scott, you're fear hyping." No, the reason why I published this book now is because this is the reality we live in. This is the most dangerous thing in the world. Last fall, the CIA at a time, in November, December, estimated that we were over 50% chance of having a nuclear war before year's end. I was saying it back then too. People, "Oh, you're just fear mongering." No, when you have, Admiral Buchanan, of the director of plans for the Strategic Command, briefing a Washington, D.C. think tank that the United States at that time was ready to engage in a nuclear exchange with Russia. Guys, that's nuclear war. A nuclear exchange means a nuclear war. He said, "We're ready to do it now. Oh, and we think we can win." But then he said something interesting. This needs to sink into your audience here. He said, "Maybe it's time we be more honest with the American public about what winning means." Because he said, if we have this nuclear exchange, life as you know it will never be the same. You will not live in your nice little suburban home, be able to hop in your car, get gasoline, drive to a store, buy groceries and all that. You will live under martial law, where food and everything is rationed. You will not live with electricity or air conditioning. You'll be living in a much more Spartan environment. Your life will be hell, because you may have to wear protective gear to protect against radiation. You may be living underground. There won't be many of you left, because everybody will be dead, but we'll have won a nuclear war. So hooray, hooray for us. This is the reality of nuclear war. The government knows this. They know exactly what's going to happen. There will be no surviving a nuclear war, even if we quote unquote win it. So wake up, people. This isn't something to chuckle at, a little mean tweet exchange and all that. This president is going to kill you. He's going to kill all of us unless people stand up and say no to this president. This is where we need a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who hasn't been handpicked by the president and his sycophantic Secretary of Defense to do whatever the president wants. We need a Secretary of Defense who says, Mr. President, the redeployment of Ohio-class submarines through social media is ill-advised, and I have to respectfully refuse to execute this order. I'm not ordering those submarines to move because you put them at risk. If you want to move them, we'll move them at a later date, but we're not going to tell anybody about it. I need a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that says, preemptive nuclear war, which it appears you're preparing to go, would be unconstitutional because it violates international humanitarian law. It violates the notions of, reciprocity. What are we attacking them for? What have they done? A mean tweet? You're going to threaten nuclear war because of a mean tweet? That's not reciprocity. That's no. But we don't have that. We have people who are just saying, yeah, way to go, Mr. President. And we have a whole bunch of cultists here in the United States who think everything this president does is genius when it's not.
I had several other questions to ask you, but that's such a perfect point to end on for now and take a rain check, if you will, once I've read your book. How do we buy your book, the Armageddon book you were just talking about?
Ever wondered what your home looks like from space? Enter your address and get a 360-degree satellite view of your home.
Highway to Hell. You can get it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, or you can get it straight from the publisher at ClarityPress.com. It's right there. Look, I wrote this book for a reason. And the reason is exactly what we're talking about. This book was published last fall, actually earlier this spring. It was written last fall, published earlier this spring, because I felt that we were headed down a highway to hell. There's a reason why I use that title. We're on a highway to hell. How do we get off this highway? And it's up to you, me, and everybody else. You're doing God's work, George, by bringing this out. But for us to talk until we're blue in the face does no good. Our words have to be translated into action. And I'm going to be doing my best. I've got a Project 38, which is designed to help, extend arms control and prevent this very thing. You're doing your work. We need other people to step up too. Sitting at home waiting for other people to do this job. In the movie I'm making, 38 Minutes, which tracks on the 38 minutes of terror that existed in Hawaii back in 2018 when a missile launch was declared. It turned out to be a false alarm, but for 38 minutes, the people thought a nuclear missile was going to hit them and they were all going to die. And I want to capture the terror that they felt and then ask the audience, if you, knowing you're going to die, that missile's coming in, if you could go back 6 months, what would you be willing to do to stop that missile from being launched? And why aren't you doing it now? I'm doing everything I can right now because I fear in 6 months. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can't wait for the book. I hope that I've got time to read it before the highway to hell accelerates to the point of no return. And the movie sounds great too. It really is an honor to regularly talk with you, Scott Ritter. You are a great educator, and if people have got any sense, they'll wake up before they can no longer smell the coffee or even the skin of their children. Scott Ritter, thanks for joining us.
So, okay, I don't know if we're all afraid right now. It seems to me we should be. Things are very, very serious. I think Scott is right. We are on a highway to hell. Scott raises the point. What would you do? What are you willing to do to avoid this happening? What work are you willing to do to bring awareness to the President of the United States that he has to be sensible, that he has to avoid war? When he came into office, he said he wanted to avoid war. He said he could create peace, at least in Ukraine, in 24 hours. Of course, we all knew that was ridiculous. But we also thought maybe he was sincere about wanting to stop the war, in Ukraine. And yet, it turned out he was only willing to stop the war on his own terms.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted a ceasefire so there could be a do-over for Ukraine, so Ukraine could be rearmed again, so NATO could be strengthened, so Russia could be attacked at some future time. He wasn't really after peace with the Russians. He wasn't really after abandoning our foreign policy of continuing to be the hegemon and also avoiding trying to create harm to Russia in the future. He wasn't willing to do these things. And that's why we're on the highway to hell at this point. That is why we're on the highway to hell. Evelina says, okay, when people lost their jobs due to the recession, they could not borrow from equity on their home. Value of the homes plummeted 30%, right? What is the value of those same homes now? Well, I can't tell you exactly what the value of these same homes are now. I can tell you that those homeowners who were able to ride out the crash of 2008 to 2011 and retain their homes have probably gotten a tripling of the value of their homes from that time to this time. Because, of course, the value of homes doubles every 7 years or so. And when we got back to a more normal state of affairs, the value of property went up. The value of property here in Washington, D.C., I can give you some examples. We live in a suburb of Washington where the median home value is $750,000. What was it here in 2007 or 2008? I don't know exactly, but I'm quite sure it was under 250,000. That home values here have tripled by 3 times. Since then. Since 2010, it's been 14 years. They've probably quadrupled. Evelina says, morbid curiosity. Now, not all homes have gone up in value because, of course, what happened to some of these homes is they got foreclosed upon by the banks, and the banks held them. And for a while, they weren't able to sell the homes, and they didn't keep the homes in good repair. So I'm not sure what's happened to those homes. Of course, new home building started again, and the new homes were priced up there. I mean, the 750,000 here, that's probably the value of a townhome in Ashburn. I don't even think that's the value of a detached house. But I haven't been tracking it really. Mr. Wonderful, Evelina says, I wonder. Mr. Wonderful says, hello, everyone. Hello, comrades. Hello, Mr. Wonderful. Where you been? Anyway, we currently have 9,494 people who are viewing this. That's good, but for some reason it doesn't compare to the last show. It reached 18.5K. I don't know why.
I don't know either.
Yes, it's evidently very hard to predict this. We still have a couple of things to go over before we end for tonight, and they are important things. So let's go on to the next piece, and I'd like to give that to you, Dee.
Okay.
It's a very good piece from Alistair Crook. From Un's Review.
Okay.
I just put it up.
Okay.
Okay, we will cover that. It's not a very long piece, sort of middle size, but here it is.
A further U.S. attack on Iran would be pointless. Kabuki. Alistair Crook, August 4th, 2025.
And here's a picture of Trump. I suppose that's Iranian writing under his smiling face. Please go on.
Escalation with Russia is clearly on the cards in one form or another, but Trump has also threatened to attack Iran's nuclear sites again. A U.S. president beset by the Epstein story that refuses to lie down and die, and under pressure from domestic hawks because of a visibly collapsing Ukraine, has been letting off a blunderbuss of geopolitical threats across the board. Firstly and principally at Russia, but secondly at Iran. Quote, Iran is so nasty. They're so nasty in their statements. They got hit. We cannot allow them to have nuclear weapons. They are still talking about uranium enrichment. Who talks like that? It's so stupid. We will not allow it.
This quote is so arrogant. It's completely full of presumption, and arrogance. He doesn't understand who he is.
No, he doesn't.
He thinks because he's the president of the United States that he has infinite power, or he acts like that's what he thinks. Is he really that stupid? He's the one who is talking stupid. We cannot allow them to have nuclear weapons. We've already shot our bolt in trying to stop them from having nuclear weapons. In this blog, we will learn that their having nuclear weapons is a sure thing if they want to have nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
It's been a sure thing forever, but it's certainly a sure thing now. So let's go on with the blog and find out why.
Well, what got me, first of all, I'm going to say, him using the word stupid, when he's the master of speaking stupid.
When he's the master of stupidity, he needs to look in the mirror.
Exactly. Escalation with Russia is clearly on the cards, in one form or another. But Trump has also threatened to attack Iran's nuclear sites again. Were he to do so, it would be gesture politics, entirely removed from the reality of Iran's present circumstance. A further strike would be presented as setting back or finally halting Iran's capacity to assemble a nuclear weapon. And that would be a lie. Theodore Postel, Professor Emeritus of Science, Technology, and International Security at MIT, regarded as the U.S. leading expert on nuclear weapons and their delivery systems, however, makes some counterintuitive technical points which, when translated politically, the aim of this piece plainly indicate that a further attack on the nuclear sites struck by the U.S. on 22 June would be pointless. It would be pointless in terms of Trump's ostensible objective. Yet a strike may happen anyway, albeit as a piece of theater designed to facilitate other different objectives, such as an attempt at, quote, regime change and furthering Israel's hegemonic ambitions in the region. Simply put, Professor Postel's compelling argument is that Iran does not need to rebuild its previous nuclear program in order to build a bomb. That era is over. Both the US and Israel believe, with good reason, Postel says, that most of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium survived the attack and is accessible. Quote, the tunnels at Esfahan are deep, so deep that the United States did not even try to collapse them with the bunker busters. Assuming the material wasn't moved, it is now sitting unsquashed in intact tunnels. Iran unblocked the entrance to one tunnel at Esfahan within a week of the strike. In short, the US strike did not set back the Iranian program by years. It is highly likely that most of Iran's HEU survived the strikes, Postel estimates. The IAEA says that Iran had, at the time of the strike, 408 kilograms of 60% HEU. It likely was removed by Iran before the Trump strike, which Postel has said could be readily transferred on the back of a pickup, and then in quotes, or even a donkey cart. But the point is that no one knows where the HEU is, and it almost certainly is accessible. Professor Postel's key argument, he eschews drawing political implications, is the paradox that the more highly enriched the uranium is, the easier further enrichment becomes. As a result, Iran could make do with a centrifuge facility much smaller. Yes, much smaller than the industrial scale plants at Fordo or Natanz, which were designed to accommodate thousands and tens of thousands of centrifuges, respectively. Postel has drawn up the technical outline for a 174 centrifuge cascade that would require a mere 4 to 5 weeks for Iran to obtain enough weapons-grade uranium as enriched hexafluoride gas for one bomb. In 2023, the IAEA found uranium particles enriched to 83.7% weapons grade. This likely was experimental exercise to prove to themselves that they could do it when and as they wanted, Professor Postel suggests.
Okay, so please note, since the attack on Iran, okay, which wasn't it at the end of June 20th or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I forget, okay, exactly when. We are now almost at the end of the first week, okay, of August. If they started then, the 4 to 5 weeks are over. They might have enough for one bomb even now as we speak.
Yes.
Please go on.
Postel's cascade demonstration was intended to underline the point. The secret story of enrichment. That was 60% HEU, it takes almost no enrichment effort to reach 83.7%. What may be even more shocking to the non-technical observer is that Postel has further demonstrated that a 174 centrifuge cascade could be fitted within a space of a mere 60 square meters, the floor space of any modest city apartment, and would require as power input just a few tens of kilowatts. In short, a few such small enrichment facilities could be hidden anywhere in a vast country. Needless in a big haystack. Even the conversion of the uranium to uranium metal, 235, would be a small size operation, that could be done in a facility of 120 to 150 square, what is it, meters?
Yeah, square meters, yes.
Another culling of the shibboleth surrounding the Iranian reality. Building a spherical atomic bomb requires no more than 14 kilogram uranium metal, 235, surrounded by a reflector. It is not high tech. It's garden shed stuff. Just assemble the pieces. No test needed, Postal says. Little boy who dropped on Hiroshima without a lot of testing. Wrong to think it needs testing. There goes another shibboleth. We would know if Iran moved to weapons capability because we could detect seismically any test of a weapon. A small atomic bomb of this nature would weigh just 150 kilograms. The warheads on some Iranian missiles launched on Israel in the course of the 12-day war, by comparison, weighed between 460 and 500 kilograms. Ted Postal is careful not to spell out the political implications, yet they are absolutely clear. There is no point to another round of bombing Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The bird has gone. The coups are empty. Professor Postal, as the foremost technical expert in nuclear matters, briefs the Pentagon and Congress. He knows Director of Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and reportedly briefed her before the Trump strike on Fordo on 22 June to argue that the U.S. likely would not be able to destroy the deeply buried centrifuge hall at Fordo. Other Pentagon reportedly officials disagree. We know that the U.S. did not even try to collapse the tunnels under Isfahan with the bunker busters, but contented themselves with trying to block the several tunnel entrances to Isfahan by using conventional weapons, such the aging Tomahawk missiles launched from submarines. To repeat the 22 June exercise would be pure kabuki theater, devoid of any solid objective based in reality. So who might Trump still contemplate it? So why might Trump still contemplate it? He told reporters during his recent Scottish visit that Iran has been sending out, quote, nasty signals. Yeah, look in the mirror, right?
And nasty signals. They've been sending me.
And any effort to restart its nuclear program would be immediately quashed. Quote, we wiped out their nuclear possibilities. They can start again. If they do, we'll wipe it out faster than you can wave your finger at it. Now, he's just unbelievable, the stuff he says.
He's a fool. He's a clown.
Yes. There are several possibilities. Trump may hope that a further attack might finally, in his and others' estimation, prompt the Iranian government to fall. He may too instinctively shy away from kinetic escalation against Russia, fearing the conflict might spin out of control, and subsequently might conclude that he could the more easily spin an attack on Iran as showcasing U.S. strength, i.e., spin it irrespective of truth as another obliterated claim. Finally, he might think to do it, believing Israel desperately wants and needs it. The last seems the more likely motivation. However, the biggest game changer of the present geostrategic era has been the revolution in terms of accuracy of Russian and Iranian ballistics and hypersonics that precisely destroy a target with negligible collateral damage, and which the West basically can't stop. This changes the entire geostrategic calculus, especially for Israel. A further attack on Iran, far from benefiting Israel, might unleash a devastating Iranian missile riposte on Israel. The rest Trump's narrative of kabuki theater. Potemkin simulacrum of supporting Israel, whilst the true underlying objective is to collapse and balkanize Iran and weaken Russia. An Israeli colonel told Netanyahu, Poster relates, that by attacking Iran, we'll likely have a weapon state on our hands. Tulsi Gabbard likely told Trump the same. Professor Postel concurs. Iran must be viewed as an undeclared nuclear weapon state, albeit one with its exact status carefully obfuscated.
So that is I think, a very good warning by Alistair Crook that we are likely to see an attack, and that it would likely be kabuki,
Mm-hmm.
and also that it would likely be unsuccessful and not touch the nuclear capability, of Iran. And it's very unlikely to decapitate, the government in Iran too, because everybody there probably realizes that the uranium has gone. It's elsewhere. It's not in those places. And probably it's being worked on to create a nuclear weapon. Certainly Larry Wilkerson thought that. He thought, along with Alistair Crook, that they had to be considered a nuclear power, right now, because he assumed that the earlier attack by Trump had made it clear to everyone in Iran, including the supreme leader, that if Iran wanted to avoid further attacks, it had to be clear that it very likely had a nuclear weapon. Because the United States does not attack other states that have such weapons. Or at least we have not actually done that before, have refrained from that. Now, with the current attacks on Russia, or the current, I shouldn't say attacks, there haven't been any attacks. There are just making motions like sending the nuclear weapons to the UK, and like making statements about moving the submarines closer to the shores of Russia. We're doing things like that. We haven't actually attacked yet. We can all hope that Trump has a healthy fear of Putin. Putin is, through making counter moves, is certainly trying to escalate that healthy fear. So in the end, we may see Trump simply backing off. I certainly hope so. Well, let's see if we have any more comments about that piece. Selena Francis says, good evening. Hi, Selena. I think you're new here, so I'd like to welcome you. We do have 11,092 people watching right now, according to my viewer.
Okay.
So that is very good. I notice again that my face is frozen. I never know when that's going to happen, but lately it's been happening on every one of the streams. I don't have no idea what is causing it. Mr. Wonderful says that Joseph Firestone, Empowering Democracy, another great show. Thank you, Mr. Wonderful, but we are not over yet. We are going on to our final piece, which is terribly significant. Would you like to take that one as well, Dee?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So let me put that up for you then.
Okay.
It is a short piece, but It's one of the most important of the evening. It's by Larry Johnson on his Sonar 21 blog.
Okay.
And the title of the blog is
What can be done to stop the genocide of the Palestinians?
of the Palestinians. Yes. You still there, D? I think something's happened to D's sound. Hello, D. Oh, her microphone, has been muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, for some reason it did that on its own. I was in the middle of talking.
Okay.
Okay, what can be done to stop the genocide of the Palestinians?
Oh, look at that crowd.
Wow. Protest for Palestinians in Australia.
Yes, amazing, huh?
Yes. People around the world are shocked by the images coming out of Gaza, yet feel impotent to do anything to stop it. I understand and I share your frustration. The United States is in a unique position to bring a stop to this horror, but the Trump administration is fully under the control of the Zionist crowd, which is comprised of both Jews and Christians. What can the average U.S. citizen do? For starters, end all contributions to both the Republican and Democratic parties. Be sure that your local congressional representative hears from you with the explicit warnings that you will no longer provide any contributions to their campaign unless they take a stand in opposition to the U.S. policy of facilitating a war crime.
Okay, I guess I have a comment about that, which is that there are many Congress people who are not really dependent on small contributions, or are, I shouldn't say they're dependent, but they're not very dependent. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe 15% or 10% of their contributions are from people who give less than $200. Okay, now if this warning from Larry reaches them and they feel strongly about it, the people who contribute more than $200, then it would, certainly hurt them. But it would not be as effective as we might expect, because so many of the people in the Congress are dependent on contributions from, fairly well-off people. So I just wanted to make that point. Okay, please go on.
On the international front, there is much that the UN can do, starting with expelling Israel from the UN unless it stops killing civilians and it allows unfettered access by UNRWA. Stop the flow of oil to Israel. Turkey and Azerbaijan are the two biggest culprits in facilitating the genocide because they continue to provide Israel with petroleum and gas.
Okay, I beg to differ. I do think those things are very, very important, and they are large culprits, certainly, but the United States has never stopped the flow of weapons to Israel, and I think that makes us the biggest culprits in facilitating the genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Please go on.
Hit Israel with tariffs. US, China, Germany, Ireland, and India consistently rank among the top partners for both imports and exports. The US is Israel's main export partner, while China leads in imports, followed by the US and Germany. China, in particular, can send a powerful message by cutting economic ties with Israel if it does not end the genocide. Here is the list of countries that can make a difference. Exports. The United States, largest export destination, about 28% of Israeli exports. Ireland, China, Netherlands, Germany, India, Hong Kong, United Kingdom, Belgium, and France. Imports. China, largest source of imports, about 19 billion in 2024. The United States, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, India, Turkey, South Korea, France, and Russia.
So it's a comparatively small list of nations.
Hmm.
That's rather surprising, I think. But it's nice to have a list of the nations involved.
Yes, it is. I think it is incumbent on BRICS to act forcefully on this since Russia and India, along with China, are in a position to exert economic pressure on Israel. Countries with diplomatic relations with Israel should be prepared to break relations and recall their diplomats. Isolating Israel is the only way to compel it to stop the murder. Finally,
I'm not sure it's the only way to compel it, but it might be the only way that uh, most nations would uh, try to use to compel it.
mhm,
Okay. In other words, of course, if nations came together and started marching, very large armies toward Israel, that would probably compel it also. But
yes.
there's no motivation in those nations to do that. So, okay, please go on.
Finally, artists should use their creativity and popular appeal to rally supporters to the cause of stopping the genocide. Roger Waters is doing that. Here are two more examples of artists speaking out.
So this is a YouTube stream. I don't know who these artists are. I don't know if this is going to work either. But let's see. I don't see any artists here, so it's
Yeah.
giving us what we wanted. But okay, anyway, I thought this was an interesting effort by Larry, okay, especially because it gives us a list, okay, of nations, gives us some facts, it gives us some concrete things to do. Uh, it tells us the nations that should be pressured. I hadn't seen a list like that before, so I thought it was important to bring it to everybody. So, have you any comments on that, Dee?
Well, that's the key issue, is the nations to do what they can by when we talk about with trade.
Yes. I think nations are not doing what they can, and that is very unfortunate. Mr. Wonderful says, great, I'll stick around. Okay. Okay, Dee, your customary avatar is not on the screen any longer.
Yeah, I noticed that. I have no idea why.
Yes. It may be the same thing that's causing me to be paralyzed. Who knows? Anyway, okay, so I think the information provided there is very valuable. At least it gives us some things to do, some things to try. And I hadn't seen too many blogs that make any suggestions about that at all. So I thought it was important to bring that up to you. So I think that brings our evening to an end.
Hmm.
Okay, I hope you liked it.
Yes, I thought it was very informative.
Thank you. We are getting close to 12K people seeing this. Okay, the promotion will continue for full 24 hours, and it's only 3 hours old. So likely we will end with 13 to 14K in the end. I certainly hope so. Okay, that will be good. Evelina says, what is China importing and exporting to Israel? Larry didn't exactly provide that, and I am not up on it, Evelina, so I cannot answer that question. I wish I knew for you. But I think we're on the point of saying good night. We've been here now for exactly 3 hours and 4 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, yeah.
okay.
I was gonna say, Joe. Yeah, remind everybody to please like, share, subscribe to Joe's YouTube channel, and also follow him on X.
Yes, on X, and of course on YouTube as well. Well, share, like, and subscribe actually covers that. And certainly I would appreciate all the support. And my Patreon account is at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And I have a Buy Me a Coffee account that's flashing across the bottom of the screen. So donations, either one, will be greatly appreciated. So anyway, thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I should have a show Wednesday evening at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, do you know what it will be on?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Every day is something.
Every day is something. Every day is new things. I'm not sure what. I know I will have an international relations related show on Saturday. Okay, as well. But I don't know exactly what it will be about. I hope that it will be about people standing down from their current posturing in international relations, getting back to the table, and talking about real solutions to the causes of conflict. We need that in the worst way.
Oh, definitely.
So for tonight, I will thank you once again, and I will say good night.
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night. And good night to you, Dee. I'm glad you're feeling better. I hope you will continue to feel better throughout the week.
Thank you.
So take care of yourself.
Yes, good night, everyone.
And good night, everyone. Bye-bye.